Good evening, everyone. Volunteer Appreciation Week, and it's great that we have an opportunity to get to know three volunteers who have spent a good amount of time working with participants in our program. And maybe we can just start by if you introduce yourselves, and maybe we'll start with Lori and then Brian and then Alysha.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Alex. So my name's Lori. My connection to distress centers of Greater Toronto began over 20 years ago when I started volunteering with the 24/7 distress and crisis line. Eventually, I became a staff member, and it was during that period when I became interested in becoming a survivor support volunteer. And although I left my staff position last winter, the agency as a whole and survivor support program itself was so important to me that I wanted to continue my volunteering with survivor support. So since July of last year, I've supported 6 people who've been bereaved by suicide or homicide of a family member, and I'm currently supporting 2 others who recently lost a family member to suicide.
Thanks, Lori. What about yourself, Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian, obviously, and I've been around for a while. I got involved with distress centers originally and currently on the helpline, so I've got a little over 10 years involved there. And about approximately 6 years ago, I guess, I got involved with the survivor support program. I had known about it, had not gotten involved, but I had a personal loss of a child, and that got me over to survivor support and working with the people involved in losing people through suicide and homicide. So I worked both types, worked with families, worked with individuals. I found it very rewarding. It's very meaningful to the people that participate with us, and look forward to carrying on into the future.
And you've done groups as well, I think.
Yes, in addition to the families, I got involved starting doing groups just over a year ago. And that's been quite an amazing experience to see a group of 10 or 12 strangers come together and over the period of 8 weeks just bond together so powerfully and gain so much strength from each other. Very great experience.
Thanks, Brian. Alysha.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alysha. I've been volunteering with the Survivor Support Program for over 3 years. I got involved through family members who used the program for a loss in our family. So I started volunteering, and I started working just with suicide loss, but then I merged into homicide loss as well. I've also had the opportunity to help with training new facilitators, doing some intake assessments, developing a youth group, and doing a lot of things under the guidance of Alex, even doing a practicum placement this past summer in the Survivor Support Program. It's truly meaningful work, and it's sometimes the highlight of my week. So I'm really fortunate to be a part of the program. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and thank you. Thank all of you. It's, anytime I'm talking to people and telling them about the work that I do, I say that I have met the most amazing people in this program. The people that come to the program, or the people that volunteer here, and the people I work with, they're just incredible people. And they bring such interesting ranges of experiences as well. And maybe that's something we could talk about, since some of you have had, the phone line experience, and Alysha, you've had experiences outside of, distress center in terms of supporting others. So what do you feel is unique about this program in your experience? So, Alysha, why don't we go the other way this time?
Sure. It's so unique that it's hard to kind of focus on one thing. I think the biggest part, just because I am working academically towards in the mental health field, so the thing that I'm finding the most unique about this program is the peer support. That often I have survivors say that they don't feel comfortable with other family members or friends anymore, people that they could talk to for years, but coming into a space where there's someone else who has had a similar loss is miraculous in terms of their ability to talk and feel supported. So I just find that that's really, really different and unique compared to the more clinical things that I do outside of the program. Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you point out the peer support angle. Is there anything else that you'd like to say in terms of, you know, because we are a traumatic loss program, that you feel it contributes in terms of traumatic loss, the peer support element?
Yeah, I mean, there are parts to trauma that you don't know until you've been through it. There are things that people may not associate with a trauma loss, like physical symptoms like migraines, head, stomach aches, things like that, that someone who's also been through that loss may say, yeah, that's what happened to me too. Yeah, I totally forget the first month after I lost my child too. And those connections and normalizing what's going on for that person sitting in front of you can be so relieving. Yeah.
Thank you. Brian, so what's, different? You've been on the helplines, you said, for 10 years, I believe. And
yes, yeah.
What's different about this program for you?
Well, the difference, I think, with the helpline, you're kind of like a first responder to a situation, and you get thrown at it and you handle it in a period or a short period of time, and then you move on. Whereas in this program, you get intimately involved with the participants over a period of time, and you see hopefully progress from week 1 to week 8. And the uniqueness of the program is, or part of the uniqueness of the program is the fact that it is a suicide and homicide survivor support program. Because there are a lot of bereavement programs out there for various reasons, and I've had participants that have been to those, and it's just not for them because the suicide homicide situation has a uniqueness all to itself that you can't share unless you've been through it. And the common expression I hear with individual participants, and particularly in a group, is they say, people just don't get it. And finally, I'm talking to somebody who gets it. And that's and I think that's a little bit what Alysha was talking about. It's such an important part for them that finally somebody understands the difficulty of going through not just a loss, but compounded by either suicide or homicide, which are just tremendous things to get around. And I think that the training that we achieve has been great. I mean, I took the training program, and I carry my book with me not all the time, but I refer to my book and the 8 steps of the program. We may not follow them in order, but they all get used each and every time. So I think that the work pulling the program together, I mean, it's been built over, 30 or 40 years, demonstrates that. And I had one person in a group last year who had actually researched across the country places to get involved, to come in as a group and potentially start a program in his home area. And he said that ours was the best one that he found in Canada. So I think that's something for everyone, the 2 people that have pulled the program together can be very proud of. So,
yeah, thanks, Brian. What about you, Laurie? How does it compare to, having worked for distress centers, been involved in the helpline, been involved with fundraising, been involved in everything, essentially? How does it work for, how does it compare for you? Because I know you came back to this, which is amazing.
That's right. Alex makes a good point there. I was volunteering with SSP, and then because of the demands of my staff position, I had to step away. It was just logistically too challenging, and then I came back to it. Like Brian, I have about a decade's worth of experience on the helplines, and one of the things about the helpline is that when you pick up that phone, you have no idea what you're going to hear. You have no idea what the person's concerns are. Whereas with survivor support, you know why they're reaching out to us. Even though every grief experience is unique, you know what the core concern is. At the same time, unlike the helpline, where you could be supporting someone on every shift over the course of months or even years, because some of our callers have been reaching out to us for many years. With survivor support, you have a time limited program. You have those 8 sessions. You go into that knowing that there is that limitation, and yet I'm often amazed by how much can be accomplished in those 8 sessions. I've been doing volunteer work since I was 14 years old, and I have never done anything like survivor support. The intensity of it, the personal aspects being let into people's lives when they are going through, I think what all of us could agree is one of the most traumatic experiences a person could live through. Now, unlike Alysha and Brian, I don't bring that lived experience. And I know that lived experience of having lost someone to suicide or homicide is invaluable. But I think what also can be important is to have someone like me who doesn't have that, but I can show them that people can still be compassionate, can still be supportive, even though they don't know what it's like to lose someone to suicide or homicide. And I hope that gives some of the participants in the program the courage to open up to people who don't have that experience and give them a chance to provide that kind of support.
Yeah, I mean, and you're all pointing to something, I eventually in this conversation, I want to talk a little bit about what's unique now about COVID, but, the pre-COVID experiences when we would meet people in person, right? And, one of the things that, we're known for is that we don't share a lot of details with volunteers coming into the first session. We do that on purpose. But, I'm the first one to say that there are pieces of this that aren't always easy. It's hard work. And what's been something that has been challenging doing this work, that while being challenging, is also something that you've been able to, deal with and come to terms with, during the course of your volunteering, perhaps even in the same session. So why don't we do Brian first, and then we'll figure out from there. I always think of, when we do training and I'm trying to figure out which people we're supposed to pair up, and we start doing this crazy math stuff, and I'm going, eventually I have no idea who's going to go first. So for now, okay. Brian.
So not sure what the question was there, Alex. You're talking about
something that's a challenge, that you've come across, going in with a new participant, something that you find particularly challenging or you have found challenging. And what was that like?
Okay. Well, there's been a couple of different ones, but one that has recurred on more than one occasion is people that come in and they have a lot of baggage in their life unrelated to their grief situation. And it can be challenging because they come in, they're emotionally upset. They're not thinking as clearly and logically as they normally would. They have this tremendous trauma they're trying to figure out. And they have other, spouse issues, family issues, argumentative issues that play a role in their life. And it can come into the situation. And the challenge is to keep them focused on the grief element, because if they've got a marital problem or spousal abuse problem or whatever, we're not there to handle that. We're not equipped to handle that. We're not trained to handle it. And it takes, it's a separate type of incident for them to deal with. So that has been, initially it was kind of like, how do I deal with this? But I actually got some advice from you, Alex, because I told you about a situation once of someone who had a lot of this baggage, and you said, you asked me the question, did they have that before they came to the program? And I say, they probably did. And then that came to the obvious answer. Well, you just focus on what they're there for, which is dealing with the grief, and you're working that as best you can. So that's one difficult challenge that I came to deal with. And then the new one, I guess, is using the Zoom to deal with people as opposed to being in the same room with them. And I started with the family last week, so we've had 2 sessions, and it hasn't been bad at all. It's aside from a couple of technical glitches to get things started with, but once we got on the screen, people get pretty focused on what they're there to talk about, and I think to a certain degree the video effect is forgotten about it because they can see us and they're looking at us and they're pouring out their stories and they get very focused on it. So I think it's an interesting opportunity going forward as to how one may continue to use Zoom in an ongoing situation.
Right. Thanks, Brian. What about you, Lori? Any challenges that you've come across?
I would say pre-COVID-19, my main challenge would be what Brian outlined, dealing with people, and it's common where they had pre-existing stressors, family dynamics, whatever it was. We have to remember that the core purpose of survivor support, and yet at the same time respect that a suicide or a homicide doesn't occur in a vacuum. And so trying to strike that delicate balance between allowing them to speak about these other issues without overlooking and addressing the core element of the program. Now, since the pandemic has been declared, I've had 2 different experiences. The first one, my partner and I had the benefit of working with a family of 4 over the course of several sessions in person. And I think we had a really good bond, so to speak. Then the pandemic was declared, and all of a sudden we had to switch gears. I think because we had that strong foundation, it was actually a seamless transition. Like Brian, a couple of technical glitches, but for the most part, proceeded very well after that. What's different for me now is my partner and I are working with 2 people who've lost a family member to suicide just this month, and we had no opportunity to be in person with them. And what's making it a little more challenging is that we are supporting them without a video component. So my partner and I can see one another, but we can't see our participants and they can't see us. So we're missing that facial expression, we're missing that body language. And I know for the first session, I found myself continually very conscious of my voice tone, of vocabulary. Even as I said to my partner when we debriefed, I find that silence is more comfortable when you're face to face because you have those cues from your facial expression, your body language. Silence when you can't see someone can be very uncomfortable. So I said to my partner, we need to work hard to make sure that these folks that we're supporting have that space during the session. Know that silence is okay, whether they just need to reflect on what we just said or compose their thoughts. And that's a challenge to create that comfortable and comforting space in these sessions without the ability to see one another. But it's a challenge that I welcome, and it's part of what I love about survivor support, the uniqueness of each match, and working hard to see how we can best support the people who are in the match with us.
And it's interesting that you say that. I had an experience doing a group support, and we've had 2 group sessions. This group, though, we had 5 meetings already in person. And so transitioning then to an online was relatively seamless, as you said. And I found that quite interesting. Now, I'd love Alysha to speak to her situation with a group, because you had, I believe, 1 meeting only, and then you've started up again. But in the situation with the group that I've been working, having had those other meetings ahead of time. But the other thing I wanted to speak to when you mentioned silences, I found that quite interesting because I didn't even think about it until you said it, that you're absolutely right. There are a lot of silences. And when I was debriefing with my partner afterwards, we struggled with those silences on Zoom. And so it's a very interesting point that I hadn't thought of. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. What about you, Alysha?
Yeah, I definitely to the COVID situation and supporting folks on Zoom, but just pre-COVID, I just want to echo what both Brian and Lori were saying. When you create this unconditional positive regard and this empathy and this space to support someone, other things come out. And when you're in trauma, other traumas get remembered that maybe were pushed down or weren't remembered before. I've been in sessions where there were lots of disclosures, very generally, of abuse and human trafficking and things that I didn't feel prepared to support. So I just want to echo what both Lori and Brian said of just trying to refocus on the grief. And by doing that, focusing on coping with trauma, because what could help with grief could also help with those other things. But being aware of what we are able to do in those 8 sessions is very, very important. So I just wanted to say that. Another challenge that I faced in my first few years even, was the fact that I look pretty young. I sound pretty young. And that was difficult for some of my earlier participants who were quite a bit older than me, who had lost a child, for example, and who are coming in their 50s and 60s and wondering what I could possibly give them in terms of support. And that's been a really interesting learning process for me. But in the past year or two, that has I've kind of let it wash away and just focus on being a support and providing that empathy. But COVID. So,
sorry, before you go there, I want to make a comment about what you said, if that's okay. I found it quite interesting that that all of you have mentioned other issues that come in, but something that you pointed out to now, which I find interesting, is for me that dealing with traumatic losses can feel so out of control very often, and for us to try and bring a framework to what we're doing, might be helpful in that regard, to help with some of that feeling out of control, right? Anyway, sorry to interrupt you there.
That's great. So with COVID, what I've been thinking about a lot, because right now I'm supporting a family. We're going to have our 3rd session tomorrow. We never met them in person, my co-facilitator and I, and we started last night the Homicide Loss group. Yes, we kind of had one session with them in person, but we have a lot of new members in, and a lot of the members that were there in person aren't in the virtual sessions, so there really isn't a cohesion that you would have seeing them 5 times in person first. I don't know, it might be a generational thing, but I'm used to watching screens very passively, having the television on while I'm doing work, looking at an iPad and doing a little bit of games on it and then putting it away. I'm finding my biggest challenge is actively engaging with a participant for an hour and a half to 2 hours sometimes on a screen that I'm used to so passively watch. I'm finding that I'm having to just stay grounded a little bit more intentionally than when we were face to face.
Wow, that's a great point. I mean, that speaking of feeling grounded, maybe this is a good time because given the work, I mean, let's be honest, the work can be hard. We hear some very traumatic stories, and they can impact us, right? They can impact you, and the volunteers in this program, I mean, the stuff they take on is just incredible. And more, in training and otherwise, we think a lot about self-care. And so can you share a little bit about your self-care and perhaps pre-COVID and COVID and what your self-care looks like right now? And I guess, Lori, you want to start?
Yes, you're right. It is my turn to go first. Yes. Okay. I would say that pre-COVID, my self-care revolved around spending time with family members and friends, often in person. So obviously that's had to change. I love to read. I love to listen to music. Walking, other types of exercise really clear my head. So fortunately, those activities are still really available to me. And I think the main difference since the pandemic was declared is trying to put limits on my screen time, because the news is all consuming, and I'm not a person who would normally spend nearly as much time on a single topic. I'm used to reading the news and trying to stay well informed, but moving from one topic to the next. Now it's like it's an effort to find something that is not directly or indirectly related to COVID-19. So trying to put those limits, consciously saying, okay, that's it, that's enough for today. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to call a friend, because I don't want to be drained. Obviously, when it comes time to support our participants in survivor support, I need to give them my all. They deserve that. And so I need to make sure I'm taking good care of myself so that I can give them my best.
Thank you. Alysha, I know this is a favorite topic of yours, self-care, and you often are the one that talks about self-care in our training. So what's your self-care situation like?
Sure. First, I just want to totally agree with Lori that we can't support participants if we're not at our best and we're not caring for ourselves. That's a huge part of what we talk about in training, to develop a routine before a session, what before your session looks like, that half an hour to an hour before, if you're able to have it, what your rest of your day or your evening looks like after a session, because we do hear some pretty horrifying stories that can really weigh us down. So that is truly important. So thank you, Lori, for bringing that up. Before COVID, my self-care has really been changing, but I like to do a lot around food. I really love cooking and baking, turning some good music on in my kitchen, putting an apron on and like cooking for my entire week. That's kind of my favorite thing. I also take really long walks with my puppy. That's really helpful. I've actually been using her a little bit more during COVID too. During sessions, I put her on this chair here. So she's actually allowed to be in sessions now, which is kind of fun. And during break for group, I just turned around and like gave her a little pet. So that was nice. And I have been getting into yoga and mindfulness quite a bit during COVID. I'm an avid news watcher before COVID. I liked to watch every news conference. I grew up watching American, British, and Canadian news. But like you, Lori, I've really had to limit that, which is very strange. So that's been a really, really big change for me. But yeah, I just think it's so important for us to be eating well, sleeping well, drinking lots of water, and just getting in touch with what's going on with us each day.
Yeah, that's a good message. Brian, what about your self-care?
I'm a little different given I'm retired, so I don't have to be working at home 8 hours a day away from the office. So my challenge is to make sure that I keep myself productive, because pre-COVID, attended Tai Chi classes, gym, socialization situation, lunches with people, different meetings, helpline, survivor support. So a lot of specific activities that I would be able to do and participate in. And then with the COVID, well, classes get canceled. So you're losing some physical activity, you're losing some socialization. And with some of the changes at the center, I'm temporarily off the phone line. So there's some big gaps that took place. So I had to create some new motivations to make sure that I continue my own Tai Chi on my own. Dog walking, we have a dog as well, and that's been useful to get out a couple of times a day there. And finding alternates to the gym. I think I was telling you I came across one of these resistance bands that I hadn't used for years, and I'm finding that that's fulfilling some of the gym activities. So physically, I'm kind of correcting what was missing, and from a productivity standpoint, I've got 2 matches that I'm going to be working on simultaneously, so that helps the productivity there. And I am speaking of mindfulness. I was actually, prior to coming on this call, looking at a website about meditation techniques and such like. So I'm looking for different things to keep myself productive and motivated and enthusiastic for the program.
Do you have and this could be any of you, and not necessarily in a particular order, I guess we kind of have to keep an order so it doesn't become chaotic, but do you have a message for other volunteers, both in survivor support and distress centers, Greater Toronto generally, about, what is a message that you would have for them in terms of taking care of themselves? Brian, why don't you start?
Well, I can't stress the need for thinking of yourself. I think both Lori and Alysha touched on, with all the depressing news that's going on, you're bombarded by it. We're bombarded by the unknown. And, we don't have our usual outlets like sports and entertainment and one thing or the other. So a lot of our releases are gone. We're either working from home or not working at all. So a lot of our routines have disappeared. And we need activity. We need productivity. So, a person has to put themselves at the forefront, say, I've got to do some exercise, I've got to do some mental challenge, I've got to keep myself fresh. I want to be enthusiastic for the volunteer work that I do. And it's just so important to recognize that, be aware of it, and take steps to make it happen. Otherwise, we get sucked into the hole of depression ourselves, and we don't want that to take place.
What about you, Alysha? What's a message for volunteers?
So I'm going to agree with Brian and then also say the exact opposite. We as volunteers, also those who have jobs or school, significant relationships, friendships, other relationships that they're working on, we are known as a group for taking on a lot. And in this time, it can feel like we want to help even more than we already have that need in us. And it might feel even more intense right now, seeing everything that's going on. But also to acknowledge that we're experiencing a trauma right now too, and losses right now too. And finding those self-care things like exercising, like Zoom chats with family as well as survivors is important, but also having a day where, you binge watch some Netflix or you aren't as productive, to let yourself off the hook a little bit, because there may be some days where that top productivity or that top volunteer that you want to be isn't there. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a volunteer who wanted to have a Zoom meeting on Friday, and I said, you know what? I might take a pause day on Friday. That's it. Yeah. What about you, Lauren? What's a message?
I think acknowledging that the basic elements of self-care are, for many people, the same as what they always were in terms of getting proper rest, eating well, hydrating yourself, exercise, whatever exercise means for you, and those social interactions. But each one of those can be more challenging in this environment. So most of us are aware of the ways to get exercise now indoors, all these online classes and whatnot. Thankfully, we're still allowed the freedom to go for walks and whatnot. But I think every one of the elements of self-care is more challenging. So to be kind to ourselves and to allow ourselves that freedom to take a day here and there where maybe we're not, quote unquote, accomplishing a lot, and yet over the long term we are, because we're recharging and we're trying to be kind to ourselves and be gentle with ourselves so that when it's time to support someone, whether it's an SSP participant or a family member or friend who's going through a tough time, that again, we can give them our best because we've taken good care of ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for those statements that hopefully will encourage others as well. You know, I mean, we're really good at being there when people are vulnerable. You know, that's what we do here, you know, and sometimes when people take on that role, and they do it a lot, as all of you, the three of you do, sometimes it's difficult, and I'm not saying this is the case with the three of you, but for others, perhaps it's difficult to, you know, to talk about your own vulnerabilities, for instance. And just coming back to that message that, you know, expressing vulnerability is we know it's a strength. It's not easy to do it, but it is a strength. And, you know, just finding a voice for it, you know, is really important. I want to talk about, for a few minutes, we talk about technology, but have you noticed any differences in how the content of people's grief that they're expressing now? Or perhaps you haven't, but I would be really interested to see if you've noticed any differences with some of your other matches.
I'd like to speak to that, at least with the family that I'm working with, because I've had a few sessions with them compared to the face-to-face sessions that I've done for a few years now. There's definitely, especially in the beginning and at the end of sessions, this want to just talk about each other's lives because they're all in different spaces. There's some that are quarantined together, but a lot of them aren't and haven't seen each other face to face in over a month now. So there's a lot of like, how are you doing? Are you sleeping enough? Are you drinking? That family stuff that they're checking in with each other. Whereas when they come in together as a group before COVID face-to-face, they've already had that conversation out of the room. They don't need to check in about whether people are sleeping or eating properly in the room. That normally happens maybe on the drive over, or they've been eating together. And there's also a lot of loss around the ability to grieve together. So not being able to have a funeral.
Yeah.
Not being able to have a burial or a visitation or anything like that has been particularly difficult right now. And just one more thing, with the homicide loss group I'm running right now, there have been a lot of trials that have been suspended.
Right.
It's not essential.
Yeah.
And that has been particularly frustrating for folks. So that's just this added conversation that wouldn't be happening if COVID wasn't a thing. Yeah.
And Laurie or Brian, have you noticed any difference in the content of what people talk about?
Brian?
Go ahead, Laurie.
Oh, okay. All right. I would say, yes, I have noticed a difference in the content, and that's at both ends of the spectrum. I worked with a family who found that in a couple of the relationships, COVID-19 was bringing them closer together. They were already under the same roof, and they were now spending a lot more time together, interacting in ways that they had not interacted before. And it was definitely intensifying the bond between the two of them, which was helping them through the grieving process. At the other end of the spectrum, to Alysha's point, the inability to have services, whether they're secular, spiritual, or religious, in the way that we've taken for granted, I think is very painful. I had an interesting experience a few weeks ago. I don't even know where this came from, but my husband and I were driving along Queen Street, and suddenly it just hit me that in addition to all the everyday stressors of COVID-19, there were people experiencing deaths in their family for a variety of reasons. And they were being denied the ability to gather in person with family members, friends, acquaintances. Personally, I've received so much comfort in the past when I've lost a loved one, to be able to gather, to tell stories, to have someone literally put their arms around you. And my eyes just welled up with tears as I thought about the people who are suffering these losses in the midst of COVID-19, and they can't grieve in all the same ways. They can't receive the same kinds of support necessarily.
Yeah. And what about you, Brian? Have you noticed?
Well, not directly. I mean, I certainly agree with everything that's been said by Alysha and Laurie in terms of the difficulty it is for people. But the one family I'm working with, their funeral, for example, was pre all the shutdown stuff, so they got that part taken care of. So, and then I had the other experience where I was following up with someone who couldn't make the group, and it was a one-on-one telephone call, some telephone sessions with her. And for both the groups or both the families that I've been dealing with, I wouldn't say that the COVID has come into play at this point in time. They've been totally focused on, well, one of them so raw, they're just at early stages and trying to figure out how they're going to make it through all this stuff. So from my experience, I haven't had a direct influence of COVID on who I'm dealing with, other than the fact I'm using a telephone and a TV screen.
I mean, typically, we'll have conversations with survivors about special occasions and events, which have a lot of significance for people. And I know a couple of situations where those have been happening during COVID. The first year anniversary is happening, which had a huge impact on how that ended up happening for them. It curtailed a lot of things that they were planning on doing for that first year anniversary. And one of the other things that I heard, and I don't know if you've heard this, is this notion that there's a lot of benefit with distractions, that you typically get by going to work or just being out in public. It's a way of getting out, and so much now is not that. You can't have those distractions the way you might normally do, and so just trying to figure out how can someone end up having some of those same ways of grieving or different ways of grieving, and how can we brainstorm around some new ideas around some of those. And I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are about rituals, for instance. If how can we talk to people about rituals in the context of COVID? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Alex, sorry, you just mentioned, I want to answer that, but you just brought something up that made me think of something someone said in the group last night. They said that this COVID-19, this isolation, reminded them of the months after the funeral and the visitation, when some of the food kind of stopped coming and people stopped coming by. And there were those moments where they were still in the depths of grief, but there wasn't as much support. But then they said they remembered how they got through that. They got isolation. So they knew kind of how to get out of that darkness again, which kind of almost gave them a leg up on some of us who haven't been through that before. That resiliency was there. And that resonated with a few of the other group members as well. So I guess in terms of ritual, there's that ritual of knowing what it's like to be in that dark place and knowing what worked for them to get out of it, which was interesting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this question for me, because I've had this conversation with other volunteers, I'd really like you to address this. What does it mean to be doing this right now? And, wherever that takes you, it's, what meaning does it have for you?
I'll jump in. The meaning is not totally changed in terms of knowing the importance of this kind of work and being blessed with the abilities to be able to successfully involve myself with people. I think because of all the tragedy that's going on with COVID and such like, it makes me feel like I'm participating in the solution as opposed to being part of the problem.
It's a great way to put it. Laurie, what does this mean for you?
I think it is a more meaningful experience because you know that in addition to the trauma of the death, people are experiencing additional stressors, many of which don't have an endpoint or a known endpoint. So you know that you're providing support at a time when people are going through the usual things that they would have pre-COVID-19, in addition to other things that are, in many cases, completely beyond their control. And so, although it is more challenging for me, as I said, there are a few technology aspects that make it more challenging. It does motivate me to dig deeper and want to do more. I mean, I know that as soon as I finished my first match during COVID-19, I immediately wanted to start another because I knew that there were people out there who really needed this. And if I can, to Brian's point, be part of the solution, then I want to be that, because on a daily basis, I keep feeling like I want to do more. So this is one of the ways where I can support people who are going through a traumatic experience.
Thank you. What does it mean for you, Alysha?
Going off of what Brian and Lori were saying, as a human who likes to be helpful but isn't a nurse, isn't a grocery store attendant or a TTC driver, those first few weeks, I had just ended a match and had one group session, but then it was kind of up in the air those first few weeks and I wasn't supporting anyone. It felt like a hole. It didn't feel like I was being that help or support that I knew that I wanted to be. So getting that back and getting into a match and starting the group up again has really helped me, honestly, day to day feel like, a help, not a hindrance to the COVID effort, and also just to continuing to support folks who are grieving.
Yeah, thank you. This is one last question that I want to ask. That what do you think about continuing this as a service? And if we were to continue this as a service, and I think my own opinion is that we probably should. But what do you think about continuing this as a service, and what, if anything, do you think we can do to help prepare other volunteers to do this?
I can see this as being an ongoing part of the program. If you think of, there are people that, from a logistics standpoint, might find it difficult to get to, say, a North York Center. We could deal with them using this particular system, with getting more volunteers trained in it. I'm not sure, Alec, you know the workload better than I do. Maybe it might allow you to have more people, more volunteers working with more participants. Myself, I find that all of a sudden I don't have to do any commuting, so that might allow me to maybe take on more participants through the course of a year than I normally would. So, it's early going, but I think with further consideration, there's probably a place for this on an ongoing basis.
Thanks.
I think the advantages or potential advantages greatly outweigh the potential disadvantages. I love the idea of presenting options to potential participants and making this more accessible. I mean, one of the matches that I did last year was someone who often struggled physically to come to the branch, even though she was able to choose the branch that was most convenient for her. For a couple of reasons, it was a physical challenge, and my partner and I really felt for her. I mean, she made the effort; she was always there and on time. But I think about someone like that who found that actual trip to the center a burden, and I love the idea of being able to provide quality support to someone without them having something that's burdensome when they're already dealing with traumatic loss.
Yeah. Thank you. And Alysha, any thoughts on?
Yeah. Your first question was how is this unique? How is this program unique? And it is unique. There aren't many programs for specifically suicide and homicide loss in the province, let alone the country. And if we were able to support people in Quebec, in like other, more rural regions, more remote regions, through this, if we were able to support people in Nunavut, that would be incredible. I know we've had people drive in from Niagara, from like really far away, just to get some support, and to take that piece out would just be incredible, honestly. I do think in terms of training, there'd be some thought put into what that meant, because I think it is very different supporting someone on Zoom versus supporting someone in person. And that would definitely be something to think about. But I definitely think it should be a permanent part of the program. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
But for my limited experience, it's been about the same.
I would echo that. And I would imagine going forward, there would be some people where it is more of a struggle and others where it's seamless. I think we're all dealing with situations where we've had that experience where remote support comes in midway through the match, and then we're now dealing or about to deal with situations where it's there from the beginning. I think a lot will depend on the individuals, but again, coming back to choices and accessibility, like I think Alysha makes an excellent point about people who live in other parts of the country. I mean, there's huge growth there potentially, and that family of 4 that I mentioned earlier that I was supporting, well, one of those people in the family lives in another province. So, I mean, here is a situation where 3 of the 4 family members in Toronto, great, that was easy. It was only because of the remote aspect that we were able to bring that person in easily, and to be a full participant in the session. So I think, it's something that is very valuable, and I would love to see us continue to offer this.
If I could just, before you start, Alysha, just let me quickly, while Lori's bringing up, I've been involved with the Canadian Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's a national program, and that's one where we'll take calls from Winnipeg, from Vancouver, from Calgary, from wherever. And the first concern is, well, how do I know what resources are available to them in that particular city? But with the help of some technology, you can cover that, and we can do this right across the country if the enthusiasm was there.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, the one thing I want to say about the technology is I'm doing both a one-on-one. I mean, it's with a family, but there's only 3 screens and then my co-facilitator and me, versus a group which has a lot more people, a lot more screens. With the family, I don't see an issue at all in terms of building rapport on Zoom and things like that. The group, there's a lot of technical things going on. There's feedback that comes from microphones, and some people are on iPhones and they can't see everyone. And there's like different pages where all the faces they've just gone through to see who's talking, and that can be a huge challenge. And there's also an accessibility thing. I mean, you need to have internet, you need to have a camera or a telephone, something that we could think about as well in terms of accessibility. But the one-on-ones, I haven't seen a difference at all.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Alex, I just want to say that I'm glad that the idea that you had of putting on the website when people are registering for the program, if they have any financial concerns, to let us know. And two people have, spoken to me about it. So, it's, just addressing that, so far people haven't felt, intimidated by being able to talk about that with me. And we do have some funding, thankfully, that we can help people out with that. So thanks for, putting that on our website too. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to say something here about, and I'm going to be a little bit poetic in the moment. I like poetry when it comes to this work, my own poetry style. So, in the moment, when I'm sitting there in stillness, I'm grounded, thinking about this program. And at one end are the people that come to us. And in those extreme moments of vulnerability and pain, they're reaching out to us, and it's layered on at this time, extra vulnerability and pain for all kinds of reasons. So, there was a woman that reached out and just the last week who found the person in their home, and because not being able to leave their home right now, had that extra element of trauma that was connected to that. And because we have volunteers like yourselves who are available, who are taking on more than volunteers often do, and because of that, we're able to get her set up right away. And so I just want to say that in that moment of stillness between the participant coming, and she says immediately, "Thank you for being there." And that's what she said, that we're available. On the other end, you guys, the volunteers who do this work, who do it so incredibly well, and being Volunteer Appreciation Week, I just got to say that, it really makes my heart sing in so many ways. It's so beautiful to see and to hear what's happening right now. And that it really says something about who we are, to do this. And so, I really want to thank you guys for all this work, and especially during this week, and this time of COVID as well. So thank you so much for this.